Mirror Twin Cities 1. Words in the snow. The hurricane blew up the snow, and it raged for a long time, covering the midday sun. The sky beyond the snowstorm was still blue, and the goshawk hovered. Looking down from midair, Mistog Snow Mountain gleams like the brightest one in a series of pearls on a series of huge ice peaks. And those lights are the snowstorms that fill the mountains at this moment. However, no matter how good the goshawk's eyesight was, he couldn't see the black spots that wriggle like ants on the mountainside under the snowstorm. Halfway through the snow-capped mountain where even the goshawk was hovering and could not fall to inhabit, there was actually a group of people in rags wading up slowly. When the storm came together, the surroundings were white, and even the north, south, east and west were indistinguishable. Halfway around, a group of trapped pedestrians had to stand on their heels, drag their feet to gather together, and form a circle to resist the hurricane together. The air on the high mountains is already thin, and when the wind blows, it makes people unable to breathe. The biting cold makes the originally thinly dressed travelers shiver. The people who had traveled a long distance were exhausted to the apex. Their faces were all horrible purple. They were obviously impoverished refugees. The clothes were ragged, and the skin on the elbows and knees showed white skin that had been frozen. The place scratched by the ice and snow did not bleed at all, but it was frozen into a dark purple color and rolled up like a small open mouth of a child, terribly abnormal. The exhausted traveler has not yet found a shelter from the wind, and the storm has swept in, fascinating everyone's eyes. There was a terrifying white all around. In the gap between the howling of the wind, only a few screams were heard, and the people in the team who were not physically strong could not stand. "Be careful, everyone! Be careful, everyone!" A hoarse voice in the team yelled, full of breath, and penetrated the storm to everyone's ears, "Pull the people around each other and stand firm. The gale will soon, it will be over." He stood in the line, stunned slightly, and turned his face in the direction of the sound. However, he couldn't see anything. "Hurry up! Be careful of!" I heard someone talking in my ear, and then a rough hand stretched out and grabbed his hand involuntarily. The wind whistled and erased the words under that fellow traveler, but that hand held his hand firmly, as cold as ice and snow. He didn't even bother to turn his head to see who was next to him. A trace of impatience flashed across his face, and he subconsciously withdrew his hand. At that instant, the most violent wave of wind whistled and came from the top. Everyone around was exclaiming, everyone was unstable, and even backed up and caught in the line. He had to follow everyone back a few steps, but at the same time he broke away from that companion's hand. "Oh!" The wind whistled and passed by, and there was an exclamation sound from close at hand. It was the voice of the man. Before he could turn his head, he felt that the hand that had been released accelerates away from his hand in an instant, and followed the fierce gust of wind. "Ah! Help! Help!" the man exclaimed with all his strength, but his voice quickly went away with the wind. He just stood in the wind and snow, did not move. Hearing the sound, the hairspring generally broke in the wind and snow, and then raised his hand in disgust, patted it, wiped his right hand with the snow, patted it clean, and put it back in his sleeve. In his arms, stood unmoved in the crowd. The wind finally left after a violent roar, and the snow that had been raging for a long time gradually fell, and the line of sight became clear again. However, most of the group was gone in a flash. That's the case when you get to the mountainside. I'm afraid there will be few more who can reach the Tiank alive. He suddenly sneered in his heart, but he continued to wriggle forward with everyone's footsteps and found a shelter from the wind. "Where? Stop and rest." The dead branches drew on the snow, first drew a circle, then stopped, and clicked on the center of the circle. Feng Xiu rolled in and rushed to his face. He closed his eyes, and his hand trembled slightly the moment he tapped it down. It's there, right? Finally going back to that place." The moment he closed his eyes, he saw the white robe, like a shooting star, falling straight from the front of his eyes, farther and farther and farther. However, the strange thing was that the face of the person who fell became clearer and clearer. Appeared, getting closer and closer to him. The pale face was raised, eyes looked at him lifelessly, fingers stretched out almost to touch his face. Suma. The lips that looked like withered petals closed slightly, calling him. Hey! The dead branches under his hand snapped suddenly, and he opened his eyes, but there was also a blank and hollow look in his dark pupils. Da-da-da, the wind was whistling, but the sound of hitting the flint continued to pass into my ears, faster and faster, accompanied by murmured curses. Braving the heavy snow, and unable to light it for a long time, the Iron Pan Li who was responsible for making the fire became extremely impatient, and shouted, "Hey, who will come and help?" Hell! No one among the people sitting next to him said anything. This is already half the waste of the Mistog Snow Mountain. The long journey has just ended, and everyone is so tired that they are falling apart. After stopping to rest, according to the internal division of labor, picking up dead branches and picking up dry food, each completed their work. A group of ragged, hungry, and cold refugees immediately found a place to lie down and rest, waiting for the meal, where there is more energy. Take care of other people's affairs? A group of inexhaustible poor ghosts. Starve you to death. Li Pu, cursing, continued to tap the flint. He didn't make a sound either, but sat in a slightly sunken snow cave in Chanyan, folded his hands, and hugged Suno's small body in his arms. However, he turned his head to Taiguo Li silently when everyone was exhausted. Only this old man was physically strong enough to swear. This Taiguo Li was also leading everyone over the snow-capped mountains this time. To Yunhuang Zhou. It seems that this man in his 50s is not simple. He thought, but his face was calm. He just touched Arnold in his arms. Along the way, Arnold was already as cold as ice. He carefully guarded him on his chest, and tried his best to lean back against the snow cave, avoiding the wind and snow that cut his face like a knife. I closed my eyes and listened to the whistling of the wind and snow beside my ears. I felt like a knife was cutting on my feet because of the long journey. It's been 2 months, so it should be close to the sky, right? How many years? I didn't expect that there would be another day to come back, and it was with this group of refugees who fled. There was a tingling sensation on his face, and the howling wind and snow seemed to cut his face with a knife. "Uncle, can you see if the tinder is wet? I have a fire sickle here, do you think it will work?" In the wind and snow, a girl's crisp words suddenly sounded, and there were rustling footsteps on the snow. "Hey!" There was a crisp sound, and suddenly there was a flow of heat in the wind and snow, and the tongue of fire slightly licked the dead branches. "Hey, it's better to use the fire sickle." "Little girl, thank you." Li Ru from the iron pan was relieved, breathing heavily, and laughter came in the wind. Since the break of the city in Jingzhou, on the way to the west, this group of mobs gathered to flee more and more, but due to the complexity of the composition, although they are traveling together, they always take care of themselves. Since only this girl is enthusiastic and lively, and has gained a lot of favor from the refugees. "No thanks, cooking is not for everyone to eat together after crossing this snow-capped mountain, it should be about to reach the sky. Everyone should work hard for a few days." The girl laughed, her voice was tired, but still full of vigor. The stray refugees were shocked. Xian stepped on the snow, moving one step at a time, and the girl walked back here again. "Do these people also want to go to Yunhuang?" The land contained, between Liuhe, and within the 4 seas, there is a fairyland called Cloud and Desolate. According to the sun and the moon, with the stars in the meridian, and with the 4 o'clock in the record, it should be the age of the elder, born of the gods, and the things are alien, either heaven or longevity, only saints can pass it through. The passage in the Liuhesh of the Great Wilderness Western Classic outlines a paradise outside the world in just a few dozen words. Just like the abbot of Penglai, Yunhuang has become a fairyland dreamed of by people in Zhongzhou for many years. Compared with the 3 Blue Mountains, where the smoke is elusive and difficult to find, the legend of Yunhuang is passed down from old age. There are evidences and even some jewelers claim to have visited that place and brought back treasures that dazzled the people of Zhongzhou. The pearl of shark, the topaz, the brilliance of the pure colors of fineness, is by no means what the world has. So, Yunhuang's existence like a peach blossom garden has been believed by countless people. However, the Great Wild West Jing only slightly mentions its location in the west of the Middle Earth continent, and it can be reached from the snow-capped mountains of the western region through a narrow strip. Legend has it that the trail originated in Yunmenzi and ended somewhere in the Mistog Snow Mountain. Based on such vague rumors, people have never stopped traveling long distances to search every trail in the Mistog Snow Mountain. The people of Zhongzhou had a legend that you can find Daowen so as to avoid Qin in ancient times. When the war in Zhongzhou was raging and the heroes fought against each other, there would be more refugees who had no way to find Daowen to avoid disasters. And these hungry people who are disheveled, how can they not think about how they can reach Tianq even if they can't survive in Zhongzhou? Just thinking about it, the rustling footsteps suddenly stopped in front of him, and the girl should have been standing in front of him, but she didn't speak. The puppet master grasped Suno tightly with his fingers, but did not raise his eyes to look at her, nor did he speak, but just bowed his head in a daze. "Can you sit here?" Outside the snow cave, the girl's voice finally asked, but before he could answer, she walked over. A slightly impatient expression flashed across the corners of his mouth, and he finally spoke with a jerky voice, "Can you give me a kiss?" "Not afraid, I am not." "Han people," the girl said, already sitting beside him, grinning, "I am from Dongba." Dongba. He was a little surprised. "Well, we live next to the Lankang River. As a result, there have been wars there recently, so we had to escape." The girl sighed, picked up a dead branch and rode across the snow. He shook his head slightly exhausted. War in the Central Plains has lasted for more than 20 years, and countless people have been displaced. It seems that the flames of war have spread to southern Xinjiang. No wonder this group of people are so anxious to escape from the Central Plains, right? "My name is Na Sheng. Everyone calls me A Sheng." The girl's voice rang in her ears, warm and lively. "What about you? I didn't see you talking all the way. What's your name?" "Sumo." He still didn't move half of his body, holding Sunyo in his arms, and replied faintly. "Sumo? It doesn't look like the name of a Han Chinese. Which clan are you from? Tatar? Lulan? Turkic? Goryeo?" Na Sheng was a little surprised, and reported all the country names he knew, but he leaned on Swiku. The sitting man has not nodded his head, his eyes are drooping, expressionless. After receiving a cold reception, Na Sheng didn't mean to move away. She had been paying attention to the young man who was with him for a long time. Although she was displaced and as unkempt as all the refugees around her, the handsome face of this young puppet master could not be concealed. His face was neat and handsome, and his features were almost impeccable. For such a beautiful and eye-catching youth, even in the difficult way of exile, it is enough to attract the attention of the enthusiastic Hmong girls. "Ah, your puppets are so well made, just like they are alive." Without words, Na Sheng saw Suno, who he had been holding in his arms, and laughed, reaching out to touch him. "You, is it a puppet master?" Bang! Before the girl's hand touched, the puppet's hand suddenly lifted up and opened her hand. "Don't move, my brother." Sumo still didn't look at her, and said, holding the puppet in his arms. The little man's hand slowly lowered, and Na Sheng saw an almost invisible transparent silk thread connected to the joint of the doll's hand. The other end of the silk thread was tied to the ring of the young man's right middle finger. Samo's hand is half exposed outside the robe, his fingers are long and he wears bizarre rings on all his fingers. Each ring is tied with a thin thread, and the other end of the thread disappears from the doll's knuckles. That man was even less than 2 feet tall, had a handsome face, draped black hair, and wore strange non-Hu Fei Han costumes. Compared with his master's shabby appearance, he was neat and dazzling. It seems that Samo has kept his props very well. Your brother? Na Sheng was taken aback, and couldn't help but laugh. It's really interesting, it really looks like you. However, smiling and laughing, the girl's face slowly turned pale, and she fixedly looked at the doll in Samo's arms. Na Sheng bit her lower lip with her teeth, and then she didn't blurt out an exclamation. God, it looks too much. The level of similarity is so subtle, even if the doll is a strand of hair or skin, it is exactly the same as the Suma in front of you. I don't know if it was an illusion, or it was because of Samo's finger in his sleeve moving. Na Sheng suddenly saw the little puppet who was only 2 feet tall and turned his head, and smiled at her slightly. Such a weird smile. He laughed. Unable to bear it anymore, Na Sheng stepped back and pressed his body to the snow cave, blurted out and screamed. He laughed. It's you who are dizzy. Sumo still didn't look up at her, but replied lightly, and then hugged the little puppet named Sunyo in his arms and said nothing. The howling wind pulled the snow in from outside, as if to freeze the 2 people in the shallow snow cave. Samo did not speak, except for the sound of wind in the snow. There was only the burning sound of dead branches beeping and peeling, and the aroma of the food had begun to diffuse. Perhaps, maybe it's too hungry, right? Dizzy. In the silence, Sheng gave in. She raised her head and looked at the puppet master holding the doll in front of her. Her eyes changed a few times. Finally, as if finally remembering what could break the current embarrassing state, the Dongba girl excitedly proposed, Suma, can I help you tell the fortune? Seeing the young man's slightly surprised expression, she smiled, a little proud. I am very accurate in fortune-telling. I have been relying on this to make money for food since I was a child. When I ran to Chudi, those people said that I was a witch. Everything is fine. Then what do you plan to do? Sumo asked as if he had a little interest. Na Sheng put his frozen hand to his mouth, looked at the scattered branches on the ground, and smiled, just help you. The 2 dead branches are tied together, one horizontally and continuously, forming a D shape. Na Sheng stretched out his left and right hands that were red with cold, and gently supported the ends of the crossbar with his index fingers, so that the ends of the vertical branches lightly touched the snowy ground, closed his eyes, his lips moved, and lightly chanted long and complicated spells. The girl's voice was extremely soft, but Suemo, who had been sitting indifferently in the snow cave, was suddenly startled, and turned his head in her direction like lightning. The doll in his arms also turned his head with him in an instant. Snow Fairy has been invited by me. Samo, what do you want to know? After chanting the spell, the Sheng didn't open his eyes. Suemo turned his head and looked in her direction, but his empty eyes seemed to pass through her body, falling somewhere unknown. The expression on his face instantly became a little strange. After a long time, he said, in the past. Now. In the future. Fairy Shui with a pen, write your instructions. After reciting a mantra again, the thin body of the Meow girl shivered in the gale outside the snow cave, but she closed her eyes religiously and moved her left and right. The pen held by the index finger hangs on the snow. As if there was an invisible force holding Na Sheng's hand, and as if the wind was blowing the dead branches on the ground, the pen was moving on the snowy ground, writing rows of scribbled symbols. Move, move, move. When I switched to the 3rd line, the pen suddenly stopped, the wind and snow still roared, but the dead branches did not move. Okay. Na Sheng let out a long sigh of relief, as if suddenly feeling cold and shivering, but she still closed her eyes and did not open them. Look, this is your past, present, and future. Sumo's eyes looked at her direction, and for a long time, he said lightly, you read it to me. Na Sheng shook his head, still closing his eyes, I never read the prophecies I wrote myself. I can't read it just like I can't calculate my own destiny. Look at it, and I will erase it after reading it. Sumo's mouth suddenly had a fleeting smile, and he shook his head slowly, don't you figure out that I am a blind man? A great pen fairy. The wind and snow were heavy, and the little heat of the firewood filled the air, and it had become cold without blowing on people. Hearing that sentence, Na Sheng was taken aback, and he blurted out and asked, "What? I said I was a blind man." Sua Mo said lightly, but he straightened his body from the wall of the snow cave, leaned over in front of the girl, and covered the snow with the prophecy with his hands. "You can't see, but you can still read." His fingers were slender and pale, almost the same color as Bai Shuet. All 5 fingers are wearing special bizarre rings, which are connected with thin lines of puppets, which are no longer visible on the snow. His fingers touched the first line of words and paused. Suddenly, the ironic smile on the corner of his mouth disappeared. Fingers trembling uncontrollably on the snow, and paused, the young blind puppet master leaned over anxiously, and fumbled for the second prediction with his fingers. The corners of his mouth were unconsciously pressed into a line, and a strange blush suddenly appeared on his handsome face that had been pale all the time. The second prophecy. Sumo's breathing started quickly, and his fingers cramped against the snow, as if he couldn't believe it. For a moment, there was a strange expression in his empty eyes. "Have you finished reading it?" After waiting for a long time with his eyes closed, when Sumo's rapid breathing was heard in his ear, but his comment was not seen, Na Sheng finally couldn't help but ask. As if awakened, the puppet master's hand trembling, and approached the last prophecy. However, in the moment of pause, the frantic wind and snow on the barren mountain has already rolled in, erasing the last prophecy written on the snow. What? What? What is the last sentence? Samo's hands groped around on the snow, but he couldn't find the third sentence anyway. For a while, the strange young puppet master eagerly called out. He said, "You write it again soon. Write it again. I didn't see it." Hearing such a drastic change in tone, Na Sheng was startled and opened his eyes. However, in a blink of an eye I saw the puppet master leaning over on the snowy ground. Sumo raised his head in the snow and looked at her with empty eyes. "Write it to me again." With such a weird look, Na Sheng couldn't help feeling frightened. He walked on his knees and involuntarily backed away, tremblingly. "No. I can't write it out. For the same person, I can only ask the pen fairy to help you once in a year." "I didn't see the third sentence," Sumo muttered to himself, looking at the snow-filled sky with his empty eyes open. "After a long time, I laughed strangely. Maybe it's God's will preventing me from seeing the so-called future. Or, for me, there's no such thing at all. Hey, then the first 2 sentences, are I correct?" Finally, still unable to restrain his curiosity, the Sheng huddled in the wind and snow and asked. Sua Mo did not speak, and slowly clenched his fingers on the snow, holding a handful of empty mountain white snow. With his head down, a strange, fleeting smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. "It's cooking, it's cooking." At this moment, the iron pot Li knocked the wood on the bottom of the pot and shouted loudly. The vagrants lying in the sheltered area of the snow-capped mountains suddenly jumped up when they heard the sound. Na Sheng said "Oh," and didn't care for him to answer. He quickly got up from the snow, took out a small bowl from his arms, stumbled over, and greeted him anxiously, "Quick! Come on! Ah! Otherwise there will be nothing to eat again." He didn't move, he just sat on the snowy ground, unconsciously groping for the snowy ground that had fallen crisscrossed by fingers. On that, the 2 sentences once had been erased by him. "If you don't close your eyes, if you see any of the 2 sentences I will kill you." After a long time, a very low word slipped from the corner of the blind puppet master's mouth. He did not rush to the fire with the group of refugees, but leaned against the snow cave alone, put Anyo in his arms, leaned down and fumbled and untied his leggings, rubbing hard and was about to split in pain. Legs. Finally stood up, walked to the snowy ground and stomped his feet, trying to activate the blood. There was the noise of everyone competing for food in the fire, and occasionally the iron pot Li made a stern drink to stop the looting in order to distribute the grain, and the noise came in chaos, accompanied by the faint heat in the wind and snow. It was already dusk, and the wind at night was even colder. After resting here for a night, these refugees will continue their trek again at dawn. The puppet master stopped, but his eyes were empty and looked at the snowy ground, as if the 3 lines of words were still there. Suddenly laughed, and whispered to the puppet in his arms, "Arnold, come on, move around." With a soft pop, the Tufuthai puppet in his arms fell out, but it was led by a lead wire. If it didn't fall into the snow, it just volleyed over and fell gently to the ground. Then, the little puppet kicked and kicked like a real person, stretched out his hand, and rolled on the snow. Sumo's sleeves were in his arms, and he could only see his fingers moving slightly. However, because of the snow, none of the leads can be seen. The wind and snow rolled over and blew the long black hair of the puppet master, which was obviously invisible, but Sumo kept looking at the little puppet rolling and laughing on the snow with a focused expression. On the edge of the fire, the girl who had just been holding a small bowl of wild vegetable batter like a treasure just saw this, and suddenly there was a feeling of dizziness in her eyes. He is really a strange man, he has broad shoulders, slender limbs and a magnificent and vigorous figure. However, looking at his face is unparalleled and beautiful, and the outline is so beautiful that he is almost feminine. That Sheng, who is a woman, feels very self-conscious. Ashamed such a contradictory but wonderful combination made this blind puppet master, who claimed to be Samo, exude an unspeakable magical charm. What kind of person is this? A girl who is proficient in fortune-telling and prophecy can always feel an indescribable strange power in him. Therefore, even on the way to escape, the young Dongba girl was still involuntarily attracted by him and leaned in step by step. "Would you like to eat something? I'm going to climb the mountain when it's dawn. There is no strength if I don't eat." The puppet master closed the thread, his fingers just raised slightly, and the little puppet named Arnold turned over on the snow with a carp. He jumped up and fell into the owner's arms. Suemo turned around and was about to leave, but he heard the bright voice in his ear. There was no shyness of the Central Plains woman in the Sheng's voice, hearty and enthusiastic, and there was a sliver of heat that touched his skinnies. That the food that everyone vie for by the fire? For the difference of 1.5 spoons, Shang Ziai and Taiguo Li scolded the refugees endlessly. But this girl generously gave him her share of food. Sumo's mouth bends upwards, there seems to be a rare smile. He did not speak, but he stretched out his hand. The enthusiastic Dongba girl quickly took the shabby pottery bowl in her hand and placed it in his hand. The puppet master's fingers were cold. "It's still hot, eat faster, the wind is so strong and it will soon be cold." Seeing that the other party did not refuse, Sheng's eyes were full of smiles. However, Samo just held the pottery bowl in his hand quietly, feeling the heat from the food in the bowl, but he had no intention of eating. The blizzard was so heavy that the contents of the bowl had already turned into ice mounds in a blink of an eye. The puppet master smiled, did not speak, but returned the food to the Sheng intact, turned his head and walked away. The Dongba girl was stunned for a long time. Does this person not want to eat, but just need to keep warm? Na Sheng stretched out his finger, poked the hard frozen batter, and sighed. It seemed that he could only go to the fire and reheat it to eat by himself. As soon as he turned around, there was a strange popping sound in the wind, as if some huge wings were flapping, stirring up the snow all over the sky, and the hurricane was blowing so people couldn't open their eyes. The bowl in Sheng's hand fell with a snap, and he subconsciously covered his face with his hands, and was blown back 3 steps in a row by the gale. "Oh my God! Look, what is that? What is that?" In the strong wind, there were exclaims from fellow refugees, frightened and frightened. Na Sheng looked at the dimly snow-filled sky through his fingers, and suddenly he blurted out in exclamation. A huge black wing rose from behind the snow-capped mountain. It flew sternly and swept over the place where the mountain tops and the sky communicated. However, such a huge bird always flew on the other side of the mountain, with only its wings protruding from the top of the mountain. The black wings concealed the sky light after the snowfall, fluttering and causing a fierce whirlwind, stirring up the snow, sliding down from the top of the mountain like a crash, and the white waves roared straight to the rest of the mountainside group of travelers. Na Sheng was dumbfounded. Like all the refugees, he stood in a daze, dumbfounded, but he heard a soft sigh in his ear. It's a lovebird. It looks like he has climbed over the snow-capped mountains, and the sky is here. Tiank? The girl was shocked, her eyes flashed with joy, and regardless of the strange bird, she turned her head and looked at the puppet master, surprised. You said the heaven is coming soon? It's really coming soon. So that means, we are about to reach a cloud shortage, aren't we? According to legend, Tiank is located in the southeast of Yunhuang, and is a barrier separating the Zhongzhou mainland. If a traveler arrives at Tiank safely, he can be regarded as reaching the land of legend. The first thing I saw was the black bird. It seems to be a bad omen. Samo didn't answer her words, but quietly listened to the huge flap of wings in the wind, making a low judgment. His prophecy is realized in an instant. Driven by the whirlwind lifted by the wings of a big bird, the snow holila on the top of the snow-capped mountain collapsed, like a huge white wave, rolling towards the group of stunned refugees halfway through the mountain. The few people sitting at the highest point of the mountain were instantly annihilated in the snow waves. It's an avalanche. The stunned group of people suddenly heard a loud shout, awakening them. Run! Run! Avalanche! Accompanied by the loud shout, there was a thumping metal knocking sound. It turned out that when everyone was stunned, the Iron Pan Li was the first to react, and he lifted his portable baby iron pan from the fire. No matter how hot Shang is, he picked up a stick and struck the bottom of the pot vigorously while screaming. Oh! Na Shang was also startled, turned his head, and saw that the horrifying snow waves had hit her face in an instant, and the girl's face was pale for a moment. However, in the face of such terrible natural forces, the psychic girl also stiffened her hands and feet for a while, trying to flee with her feet, but her feet were soft and not at her disposal. The snow waves tens of feet high fell like a sky curtain, obliterating everything. The lake surface is like a huge mirror, reflecting the dark night and the city in the lake. In the middle of the city, the huge white tower soars into the clouds. The wind on the top of the tower was also extremely violent, making the clothes hunting and dancing. The base of the bottom of the white pagoda occupies 10 hectares of land, and the tower body has soft points along the way, but even so, there is still a vast area of 2 hectares on the top of the tower. In such a large place, there are actually only a few buildings, temples, stargazers, and altars. On the stargazing platform, the night is as cool as water. When the wind rose, the woman tightened her plain clothes, and the calculator in her hand fell to the ground all at once. Next to her was an elderly woman in black. She seemed to hear some ominous sound in the wind, and she turned tremblingly on the stargazing platform and looked towards the southeast. There seems to be a black cloud covering the starry night. I was shocked someone has arrived at Tiank again. The old woman sighed and murmured to herself, those Zhongzhou people who are like moths to the fire, there are a few more stiff corpses on Tiank. Sirius Star turned red. Suddenly, the silent girl next to her said aloud, looking up at the stars in the night, pointing her fingers far away, her voice indifferent, Aunt Wu, there is an ominous person here. Holy woman, who did you say is here? The muddy eyes of the old woman became sharp, and there was a faint wolf-like cold light, all of a sudden, crawling under the feet of the plain-clothed girl. Is it an ominous person? Saint, please you calculate the person's position again so that Wu Peng sends people to remove this ominousness as soon as possible. I can't figure it out. After a moment of silence, the girl looking at Sirius lowered her head and replied indifferently, I can't figure it out, but the danger and ominousness are approaching the deserted cloud continent. Wu Gu was stunned, and looked up at the Supreme Saint. Is there anyone in this world who can't even calculate the Hui Saint? The lake is vast and endless, just like the sea. On the other side of the lake, countless wings swept lightly across the fog, and the four hooves of the steed fell silently to the ground. The horse with wings is so handsome. With a long satin-like mane, runs and flutters like a dream. The wings under the horse ribs were as thin as cicada wings, and they were put away as soon as they hit the ground. Each horse's high and flat forehead has a little white starburst. However, what is strange is that the knight on horseback is dressed in black, and one corner of his robe is flying in the wind. However, everyone wears a helmet and a mask to cover the entire face. The eyes behind the face mask are all dim. Light, like two black holes. As if just patrolling his own territory, two knights, one blue and one white, led the legion on the Pegasus from the sky to the ground, preparing to return to the base camp. However, when it fell to the ground, the two knights leading the team stopped their horses. Bai Ying, someone is coming. Sitting on the left was a knight in blue. He raised his head and looked at the loneliest and brightest star in Zhongtian. Life. Sirius has turned into a dark red color, lonely shining cold light, seeming to imply the countless blood that will flow out under the sky. Regardless of their Kongsang nation or the current Ice clan, Sirius is a disaster star. When Sirius appears, a catastrophe will befall the world. Okay, you go back first, Lan Xia. And riding, was a female knight with a white gauze rising in the night breeze, but it was strange that her face was covered with black gauze, as if she was in mourning for someone. I'll go to Tian to remind Miu. Be careful. It seems that the female knight's status is still above him. Although Lan Xia is a little worried, she can't stop her. She just nodded, pulled up the reins, and exhorted, those Binji sees you in order, maybe they will. Don't worry, I brought a lightsaber. The white-robed female knight smiled slightly, raised her hand, her wrist just turned, and there was a sudden sound. There was a white light about 3 feet long between her fingers, and the white knight quickly turned her wrist. That white light was suddenly uncertain, like a sharp sword, pulling up a string of sword flowers, and the frost and fallen leaves in the air were suddenly torn to pieces. Lan Xia nodded slightly, and immediately bent down to Bai Ying, put her hand on the sword collar of the saber, and saluted the warriors, as one of the 3 disciples of the sword sage Bai Yuan, I can't doubt your ability. Bai Ying turned her finger and made a soft click, and the white light suddenly annihilated between her fingers. The female knight in white put her small sword hilt away and looked at the stars in the sky again. The doubts and murderousness between her eyebrows became more and more serious. She nodded and said to her companion, I will go back, you will lead the team back first. Then, Bai Ying, you must return to the city before dawn. Lan Xia said nothing, turning the horse's head. Tianma spread its wings again and rose into the air, leading the other black soldiers into the air. Those Pegasus and warriors were silent, flying with countless pairs of wings, and disappeared into the vast water vapor of the lake in a flash. Beautiful child, the darling of the gods, why did you become like this? That voice rang in his dream again. It was like singing, ethereal and gentle, coming in like a veil, wrapping him in layers, like a thick cocoon, as airtight. He only felt suffocated in his sleep, and he stretched out his hand desperately, trying to tear the thick cocoon that bound him, but as if he was caught in a nightmare, it was just a futile struggle. The voice continued to drift closer, slowly approaching my child, I hope the gods and gods of the sky will bless you. Your eyes will only see a smile, your fingers will hold the most precious thing, every drop of your tears will be like a deep blue sea. The roundest pearl is as precious, and every smile of yours will bloom all over the land like a night of dream. Sleeping Samo, why are you crying? Tell me, what do you want? The face was close at hand, leaning close to his cheek, looking at him in his sleep quietly and tenderly, and asked softly like a self-talk. Such a pale face, without a trace of blood. The elegant and dignified face, with a cross-star blush on the brows, makes the face pale and pale, like a paper cut, like a ghost that can be blown away in one breath. However, the white man looked down at him, sighing, with a strange look in his eyes. Finally, as if after all he could not bear the inexplicable temptation, the man leaned down and gently touched his cheek with his lips. "I want you." At that moment, as if the spell was lifted, he suddenly opened his eyes from his dream. Before the other party was struggling, he stretched out his arms to embrace the pale shadow and kissed the center of his eyebrows. "That strange blush," answered in a dumb voice, "I want you." The person caught in his arms was struggling in a panic, but the more he struggled, the tighter his arms became. During the fierce struggle, he easily grabbed the opponent's arm, and instantly pressed to the ground, cold. His lips kissed the red marks on his eyebrows. "What are you going to do? Are you crazy? Let go of me! Let me go!" The person under him was startled and anxious, but his hands were clasped and unable to move. "Think you are a good person, a nasty thief. Let me go." "Is that Sheng's voice?" He was suddenly in a trance, as if his mind suddenly returned to his body. At the moment he hesitated, the person under him quickly pulled out his buckled arm, and a slap fell on his face neatly, completely waking him up. You bastard!" Sat up angrily, and hurriedly grasped the torn front of the front. The girl who stepped aside was frightened, and there was already a three-point cry in her voice. She found this when she woke up. People were sleeping on the side, and couldn't help but get closer to see if he had been injured in the snowstorm, but he was treated like this. The puppet master's body was stiff in the wind and snow. He didn't justify his behavior, just bowed his head silently and didn't speak. His little puppet named Arnold was scattered on the ground next to him. The puppet fell out during the struggle just now and lay on his back on the snow. It was just a smiling mouth, but I don't know when it has turned into a grin. His expression, lying on his back on the snow, opened his mouth and laughed strangely. Yet. Seeing the terrible change of the puppet again clearly, the Shang couldn't help but screamed out, flinched and leaned against the mountain wall, hugged his head with a finger. At the doll, "It's laughing! It's laughing! It's laughing again!" "Arnold!" Samo finally spoke out. Although his eyes were invisible, he seemed to know where the puppet fell. He spoke softly to the snowy ground, "Don't be naughty anymore, come back." He didn't see how his fingers moved. Shwe, the puppet lying on the ground suddenly seemed to be led by an invisible fuse, jumped up unwillingly, and fell into the cold embrace of the puppet master. "You are naughty again." The puppet master lowered his head and stroked the little puppet's hair. Suddenly a cold light flashed across his face. "Was it you just now? Did you play the trick, you bad boy?" The puppet master's hand was astonishingly fast in an instant, and with two soft pops, the Shang was dumbfounded as he watched Sumo's fingers fall into several pieces, which turned out to be the hands and feet of the puppet. "Give me peace, Arnold!" In a flash, he took off his beloved puppet's hands and feet. The puppet master had been calm and empty for a moment with a terrible murderous intent, and lowly faced the man named Suno in his arms. As soon as the puppet's vicious voice fell, he raised his hand, and squeezed the puppet's laughing open mouth very hard, as if shutting back the scream. "Sorry, I offended." After Sumo said something to his puppet inexplicably, he finally turned his head and nodded lightly at the Dongba girl who was retreating in fear, which was regarded as an apology. When Na Sheng saw him come over, there was an unbearable fear in his heart, so he moved a few feet aside against the mountain wall. Even if she had been naively infatuated with this handsome blind puppet master in the first place, now she too, finding that this handsome and innocent man named Samo was far from what she had originally imagined, how terrible it was. At that moment, the girl shuddered, but when she was trying to stand up and stay away from this person, she suddenly touched something under the snow with her finger. She subconsciously looked down, and instantly burst out a terrifying scream. "Dead man! Dead man!" Na Sheng jumped up, leaving the side of the mountain wall far away, rushing over and tightening the sleeve of the puppet master. Trembling fingers pointed directly at the snowy field just before sitting, forgetting the person in front of him. I can't see anything there, the thin snow layer has scattered because of her groping just now, and a pale, stiff face is exposed to the sky, and his lips are slightly opened, as if shouting to the sky. When she touched it just now, she touched the cold teeth in her open mouth. This mountain is full of dead people. It's not surprising. Even though the Sheng screamed and trembled by the side, Sumo's expression remained unchanged, and said indifferently, after the Mistog Snow Mountain, the heavens kui how many years have passed. In order to reach Yunhuang, this place has become a cemetery for Yuzhongzhou people. By the way, where's Tai Guo Li? Where's the second grandmother Gu? At this moment, I thought that Sumo couldn't see the dead people, and his thoughts turned, and the companions who had just been together to scorch fire again. However, there is only a piece of white snow in the surrounding area, and the large group of people are not there anymore. She jumped up and exclaimed, they should be under here. Samo smiled, as if recalling a lower position, walked over and kicked away a thick snow with his toes. The snow rustled down, and a purple hand came out under the snow, maintaining a painful and cold posture, pointing to the sky, as if trying to struggle to escape from the avalanche. Take off, but was buried alive after all. God! That was Lao Er's hand. Seeing the scar on the back of his hand and recognizing his familiar companion, Sheng exclaimed, they are all dead? Just now, the avalanche, didn't they escape the avalanche just now? The lovebirds can detect the arrival of outsiders from hundreds of miles away and startled. If the Zaniao flies, then the traveler is safe, if the blackbird flies, then it is a snow burial. Sumo continued to kick his feet away. In the snow, a dozen hands were exposed under the snow, his posture twisted strangely, touching his toes. Their luck is far worse than you. Na Sheng looked at the hands of those suffocated companions on the snowy ground. He was shocked. He turned his head subconsciously and couldn't bear to look at it. After a long time, he asked in a low voice, "It's you saved me in the snowstorm." However, as soon as she turned her head, she saw the answer. The monstrous waves caused by the avalanche are still surging above her head. She screamed just as she was about to exit, when she suddenly realized that the snow wave that hit her was actually condensed in an instant. It was like tens of thousands of horses galloping down the mountain, but one of the angry horses that caught up with her was about to trample her to death, but was frozen in the air by inexplicable power in an instant, and solidified into an ice sculpture. What kind of power is that? She had an incredible look in her eyes, and turned her head to look aside that strange puppet master. However, Samo turned his head and didn't answer her question heedin. He just said indifferently, "It's just a meal." After walking a few steps, he reached the top of the mountain and stood for a long time, as if feeling some familiar breath in the wind. Na Sheng only felt cold, looked at the corpses all over the snowfield, and shrank for a moment. He wanted to walk to the only companion now, but he was inexplicably afraid of him, and he hesitated for a while. The long night and snowstorm have passed, and the sky is slightly bright. Sumo stood on the top of the Mistog Snow Mountain, the goshawk hovered over his head, and the sky blew his long soft hair. He closed his eyes and stood facing the west for a long time. Suddenly he raised his hand and pointed to a place on the ground under his feet. He seemed to be talking to himself. He smiled slightly and said in a low voice, "Yunhuang, I'm back." Second, the corpse under the ice standing 7 or 8 feet lower than him, Na Sheng looked up at the young puppet master, and found that the blind man's always blank eyes flashed with lightning-like sharp light, shockingly shocking. She tried to trek through knee-deep snow, stepped onto the last snow ridge, and stood side by side with Samo. The wind above the top was so violent that she couldn't open her eyes. However, when she stood still, followed his hand and looked towards the ground below her feet, she suddenly involuntarily blurted out softly. "The sun has not risen yet, but the dim light of the dawn has enveloped the earth." Standing on the top of 10,000 ren, overlooking the land underfoot, the mysterious new world reveals its true face at dawn, showing strange and beautiful colors. Cyan, blue, and sand are interlaced, like a huge blanket woven vertically and horizontally. Shop towards the end of the sky. There seems to be a huge lake in the center of the continent. In the morning light, it seems as if scattered pearls have been sprinkled by the gods, emitting a bright light. Cloud shortage. That is the wild land that has been passed down by people in Zhongzhou for many generations? That's Yunhuang? That's Yunhuang! The Shang cried out in surprise. So many days and nights of fatigue disappeared. She rubbed her eyes, clapped her hands and jumped. Suma! Suma! Is that Yunhuang? We finally arrived. The puppet master heard her yelling and laughing, but a faint sneer flashed in his eyes. Yunhuang, where is the legendary Daowen of those Zhongzhou people? That was just another chaotic Zhongzhou. This Dongba girl is so happy too soon. However, he only said, it is only after the previous heavenly fault that we have truly reached the cloud shortage. Tiank. Na Shang was stunned, remembering the old legend said, after Mistog Snow Mountain, it is the only entrance to Yunhuangzhou, Tiank. Only after passing that mountain can we truly reach the land of legend. When she thought of the dangers ahead, most of her joy was removed. She stood on the top of the snow-capped mountain with a bitter face, looking at the continent close at hand, took a breath, and tried her best to cheer up. Tiank? Where is Tiank? Suemo stood on the top of the mountain. Although he could not see with his eyes, he seemed to know Yunhuang continent well. He pointed his finger at a certain place under the mountain, and his expression suddenly changed uncontrollably. Do you see that Jinghu Lake? There is a white pagoda in the center of the lake. It is the center of the entire Yunhuang continent, Tiank, in it Zhendongfang. Where are there any towers? That is, how can you see them when you stand here? Na Shang followed his fingers and muttered, his eyes patrolling the ground. Suddenly, her eyes froze, and her eyes widened unimaginably. At the end of the world, there is a thin cloud in the morning, and behind the cloud there is a glow of sunshine. However, in the cloud group at the end of the sky, there seemed to be a cloud slowly drooping, like a rainbow, touching a large area of clear water on the cloud wasteland. In the morning light, the white drooping cloud glowed softly, shining through the earth for hundreds of miles. Na Shang looked at the falling cloud between the sky and the earth in the extreme distance, stammered and almost bit his tongue. What? You say, that is? Is that a tower? Have you seen it? That is the Garon White Pagoda known as the heart of the cloud desert state. Hearing the incredible tone of the girl, Suemo lowered his head and smiled, with a lot of emotion in his smile. How many years? It is still here. How many people and countries have fallen, only it is still there. Why, how could there be such a high tower? How much effort would it take to build it? Standing on the top of Wanrengxiu Peak in the gradually brightening sky, the Shang completely forgot the cold on his body and stared dumbfounded. The magnificent scene in front of me murmured, sure enough, the people who live in Yunhuang are all immortals, right? Such a tall tower can't be made by Zhongzhou people. The White Pagoda of Garon is on the Jinghu Lake in Yunhuang Island, with a radius of 30,000 hectares. The holy city of Garon, the capital of the Kongsang people, is in the center of the lake. As if recalling the data he remembered in his head, the puppet master hugged the puppet. In his arms, facing the cloud and low road, the White Pagoda is 64,000 feet high, and the base covers an area of 10 hectares. It occupies 1/10 of the area of the capital. About 7,000 years ago, it was the greatest in the history of Kongsang. Emperor, Xingzun Emperor Zhua, who founded the Piling dynasty, obeyed the advice of the chief commander and sacrificed to heaven with the blood of 900 virgins, and then buried 6 sides of the White Pagoda pedestal, driving 300,000 people for 70 times. It was only in the year that the Tongtian White Pagoda was built in a place known as the center of the Yunhuangzhou Island. Ah! Why do you want to build it so high? Although Na Shang was fascinated by this spectacle, he couldn't help asking, it takes a lot of effort to even climb up? It's not really capable of skyrocketing. Those Kongsang people have always thought they have the ability to reach the sky. Suemo suddenly sneered, sarcastically. Later, when it was built to 64,000 feet, a collapse occurred and nearly 10,000 craftsmen died. Xingzun. The emperor was furious and killed the 200 supervisors under the master craftsmanship, once again sacrificed to the heavens with 1,800 virgins, and sent additional manpower to start work, this time exceeding the original height, reaching 70,000 feet. As a result, it collapsed again, falling down to 6,000 feet, or returning to its original height. This happened 5 times in total. No matter how many creatures were sacrificed, the White Pagoda of Garan could only reach the height of 64,000 feet. Hey, it seems that God only allowed them to be so high. Emperor is really stubborn. The first surprise passed, Na Sheng finally felt cold again, holding his shoulders and shaking in the snow, made so what's the use of high? The puppet master's hollow eyes looked at Yunhuang Earth, with a mocking light in his eyes. Kongsang's de Si Ming said, the higher the White Pagoda is built, the closer it is to the place where the heavens live. Then the Si Ming and the priest prayer is easier to be heard by the emperor. Oh, but it seems that the emperor didn't like them being too close. He was shivering, but Na Sheng still couldn't help laughing. What do you mean by empty mulberry? Yunhuang turned out to be the same as Zhongzhou. There are also national ones. Of course. Do you think Yunhuang is really the peach blossom spring? Suemo shook his head and sneered. He turned around, facing the eastern world when he came, and raised his hand to point to the land of Zhongzhou. Yitianke is a boundary. Yunhuang and Zhongzhou are separated on both sides. But Tianke is like a mirror, and Yunhuang and Zhongzhou are like 2 images inside and outside the mirror. But now Kongsang has also been subjugated, right? Don't say anything. Besides, I think I've come here in vain. Na Sheng became depressed, jumped his feet to warm his body, and pouted, Tianke, which one is Tianke? I told you, it's the mountain in the east of the White Tower. Sumo replied. Na Sheng lowered his head and looked at the ground at his feet, distinguishing the position with the White Pagoda as the center. He patrolled the ground for a long time, and finally fell not far in front of him, and suddenly jumped up. What? You said that hill is the sky. Damn it, shouldn't the Tianke be higher than this snow-capped mountain? Hey, did you remember the direction wrong? How could this small soil be the Tianke? Tianke was only 1,000 feet tall. Suemo was too lazy to pay attention to her, and only said, don't underestimate this small slope. There are no fewer dead people there than on this snow-capped mountain. You can go there alone, even if you are good. Seeing the lush green hills under the snow-capped mountains, the girl suddenly felt a strange oppression. Li suddenly couldn't speak. This undulating mountain forest actually had a more subtle and murderous intent than the Miaozhong jungle. Now you listen carefully to me, I will only say it once, and we will go our own way. Feeling the warmth on his face getting stronger and stronger, knowing that the sun is about to jump out of the clouds, Sumo suddenly quickened his speech. Speed, with the White Pagoda as the center, its right in the east is Tianke. If you can get out of Tianke alive, you will follow the water under the mountain and walk westward to a place where people live. The name of it is Zhiguo. Then you can ask the people there where you want to go next. I want to follow you through the Tianke. Already feeling terrified at the small mound below the mountain, Na Sheng couldn't help but grab the puppet master's hand. Anyway, you have to go this way, aren't you? You? Take me with you. Even if I want to go this way, why should I take you along with me? Suemo sneered suddenly, and broke away her hand in disgust. Are people always so greedy? For the kindness of that bowl of rice, enough returns have been paid. His sun has come out, and you must go down as soon as possible. Don't say I didn't warn you. Na Sheng was staggered back by his slam. Fortunately, the snow was soft and it didn't hurt to fall. She opened her eyes wide and looked at the young puppet master, who suddenly turned her face to disrespect, and said, Greedy? We walk all the way, and everyone else is dead. Shouldn't we help each other? Help each other? Sumo laughed suddenly, but his face was ridiculous. It sounds good, what can you help me? No one has ever helped me. And why should I help you again? You can't see with your eyes, I can help you recognize the way. Looking at the empty eyes of the puppet master, Na Sheng struggled to get up from the snow. You are groping down the mountain like this, how can you do it? Suemo was taken aback, and then smiled again. Oh, yes. I forgot that I was blind. However, his smile was not restrained, and his face became meaningful. But, you think I really look like need someone to lead the way? Na Sheng was stunned by his question, and looked at his eyes seriously. His eyes were strangely dark blue, but they looked a bit like natives of Miao territory. However, his eyes are hollow, without a bottom, and always look dim and have no focus. However, when you look at him, you will feel that he is also looking at you. Is this person really invisible? Oh! The sun has risen. After hesitating, she suddenly turned her head and looked at Dongfang, cheering, it's beautiful. Suemo turned his head subconsciously, facing the sun's rays on the ice and snow. At that moment, Na Sheng saw, at the moment when the puppet master was facing the rising sun, his eyes were still empty, and the intense and dazzling light did not change his pupils. It turns out that you are really blind. The little Sheng's trick succeeded. She looked at him with some rejoice and pity. Don't you need someone to lead the way? I will help you, you help me, and we will live together. Tiank, isn't it evened? You count me. Before her laughter landed, Sumo's face suddenly became ugly, even with a hint of hideousness, and Na Sheng couldn't help but take 2 steps backwards, but as soon as she backed away, Suemo's hand has been reached out, clasped her throat, and threw her aside fiercely. When Fang Ding was shocked, stroking her throat from the snow, she saw that the young blind puppet master had already strode away from the top of the mountain and ignored her former companion. She opened her eyes in horror. Samo walked through the knee-deep snow, not only did not sink into the snow, but he did not leave a footprint on the snow he stepped on. Is he a god? No wonder he came to know what Yunhuangzhou was like when he talked about it. So, was he also the who lived on Yunhuangzhou? Arnold, lead the way. After walking a few steps, between the light movement of his fingers, there were a few knocks in his arms. The hands and feet of the puppets were all installed, and Samo gave a gentle command. The little puppet in his arms seemed to be a prisoner. The bird came out of the cage, a happily somersault fell to the ground, stretched out his hand, kicked, and then jumped forward on the snowy ground, clattering and clattering, unusually brisk. Na Sheng stared at this scene dumbfounded. Could it be that Sumo relied on this puppet to lead the way? At the moment when the Dongba girl was stunned, the little puppet who walked away suddenly turned around, grinned at her on the snow, and smiled secretly. Oh! Seeing the secret smile of the little puppet named Arnold, Na Sheng still felt unspeakably chilling, and couldn't help exclaiming again. However, before she screamed to the ground, Arnold bounced with Samo, and disappeared into the snow on the icy peak like the wind. On the top of the everlasting snow mountain, the sky was howling the wind, the goshawk hovered, and there was a horrifying whiteness between the sky and the earth. Except for the corpses under the snow, she was the only one left. Na Sheng stood up in fear, trembling and hugging her shoulders. Cold and hungry anyway, should we find the way down the mountain first? Otherwise, it will freeze to death on the snow-capped mountains. The sky gradually strengthened, and the sunrise in Yunhuang was no different from Zhongzhou, but in the eyes of her visitor from afar, the land shone by the sun was shrouded in indescribable mystery and magnificence. There is the sea on all sides, and on the land with mixed colors, there is a huge lake at the end, like a clear blue eye, shining at God, and the city in the lake and the huge white tower look like blue-eyed ones. Hitomi! It's so beautiful! Na Sheng couldn't help but blurt out his admiration, raising his arms as if encouraging himself, and shouting, Yunhuang! Yunhuang! I must go to Yunhuang! The crisp voice of the Dongba girl resounded through the empty mountain, making the snow fall. Hey! Na Sheng quickly covered his mouth, don't make the avalanche anymore. No one will save you if Samo isn't here, idiot. She cheered up, looked at the snow-capped mountains at her feet, and looked for the way down the mountain. The place Samo had just walked did not leave any footprints. She only followed the route he took after walking for about 10 feet, and she couldn't remember him for a while. I couldn't help but hesitate. I didn't know which fields could be settled, and which ice ditch and cracks under the floating snow. After seeing it for a long time, she felt dizzy, and that large patch of glaring white made her eyes terribly painful. The sun is rising higher and higher, making the top of the snow-covered mountain a little warm during the 1,000 years, and the sky is clear. There is no sign of snowstorms and hurricanes. This western of Mistog Mountain is comparable. The east side of the time is much better. It seems that even without Sumo's help, as long as you are more careful, you can still reach the mountainside below the snow line before dark. Na Sheng secretly rejoiced, while carefully looking for a foothold, slowly walked down from the top of the snow-capped mountain. Suddenly, she heard a slight rustling sound behind her, as if the snow was shaking off layer by layer. Who? Na Sheng yelled in surprise and joy, thinking that he would be able to meet the survivors of the same group. He turned his head and looked behind him, but the Mistog snow mountain was empty, only covered with thick snow. There is no human breath. Have you heard it wrong? But, there is really something moving. The girl looked back blankly, and continued to explore her way down the mountain with some uncertainty. However, after she turned her head, the rustling sound rang again, gradually getting denser and denser, as if countless things were moving, and the range of the sound became larger and larger. Later, it was everywhere in the wild. The same voice, weird and terrible. What is it? The psychic Dongba girl suddenly felt the terrible evil intentions, but she looked around the snow mountain, but there was nothing but the thick snow. The sun rose and shone warmly on her body, but she shuddered cleverly in the evil spirit that was invisible but ubiquitous. The sun has come out, and it must go down as soon as possible. Don't say I didn't warn you. Suddenly, Samo's warning echoed coldly. Isn't that a joke? The sun is out, why should it go down as soon as possible? At that time, she just ridiculed herself secretly at another startling sentence said by this weird man, and skipped it. However, at this moment, hearing the strange rustling sound of the mountains and plains, and feeling the weird aura slowly approaching, the Dongba girl suddenly had an ominous intuition, and no longer cared about whether the road ahead was a walkable or not. She tried her best to get her feet out in the snow. Run wildly, stumble. Suddenly, she tripped over. The snow layer was kicked away, revealing a blue-white stiff corpse. It looked like a Zhongzhou native, but he was wearing clothes that seemed to be ancient. I don't know how many years ago it was a traveler who died halfway to reach Tianque. This mountain is your cemetery for Zhongzhou people. Samo's words rang in his ears again. Na Sheng didn't even have time to scream, he struggled to get up, and continued to stagger down the mountain to flee. Something is coming. Something is coming. The strong premonition and fear made the psychic girl choose to escape desperately. However, her feet were caught. The Sheng subconsciously looked behind him, and suddenly couldn't help but exclaimed, "Ah! Ah!" The hand that was frozen into a transparent bluish-white, clutching her ankle tightly, the stiff corpse crawling under the snow suddenly moved slowly, holding her ankle with one hand and the other. Supporting the ground, the body slowly propped up from under the snow layer. He was clearly an ancient person, and his clothes were completely different from those of Zhongzhou people today. His face and hands were already stiff and pale and almost transparent, and the light blue blood veins under the skin could be seen. Don't know where. How many years have been buried under the snow? It seems that its joints are not working well, and the whole body is held up straight, letting the thick snow that is pressing on it fall rustlingly. Ghost. Ghost. When the zombie's pale and muddy eyes looked over, Na Sheng finally yelled in fear, struggling desperately, trying to kick off the boots on his feet together with his leggings. However, the preparations she made before climbing the snow-capped mountains were really meticulous and earnest to get home. No matter how hard she tried, her feet were still tied tightly by leggings and couldn't make it out. It's over. Na Sheng wailed in his heart, feeling the sudden force of the hand holding her ankle, dragging her back. She had no choice but to cling to an icicle, not letting go, but she didn't know how long she could hold on with her own strength. However, the surrounding rustle became louder and denser, as if countless things were moving under the snow layer. Na Sheng couldn't help but look up, and was frightened. All of a sudden the whole mountain is moving. The snow was shaken off, and under the snow, pale, expressionless zombies burst out of the snow. All kinds of dead people in ancient costumes, and the mountains and plains were filled with dead white faces. The sun has risen very high, rising from the back of the Mistog snow mountain, spreading the light over the earth, and even on the top of the snow for thousands of years, you can feel a slight warmth. However, when the sun shone on Na Sheng, she only felt desperately cold. Is she going to die here? After trekking for so long and suffering so much, now Yunhuang Earth is close at hand. Is she going to die here? Even Tian can't be reached, let alone set foot on that mysterious land that is unattainable. Not reconciled. Not reconciled. Not reconciled to death. The Dongba girl clenched her teeth secretly, slowly let go of a hand that was climbing the icicle, stretched it into her arms, and held the Miodeo she carried with her. Even if she left one foot on the Mistog snow mountain, better than being buried here, right? She took a deep breath, suddenly let go of her hand, letting herself be dragged by the zombie and slipping out. Suddenly looking back, it was a knife. However, at this moment, the cold hand that was holding her ankle suddenly loosened. She rushed back with that sword, but she hadn't practiced martial arts, so she couldn't send and receive freely. The blade still cut through the thick leggings, and there was a slight pain in her ankle, which should have cut her skin. However, it is finally free. Sheng didn't have time to think about it, so he bent his knees and stood up. However, she who was about to flee for her life was suddenly stunned by the scene in front of her. The sun has risen from the back of the snow-capped mountains, and the brilliance is falling on the earth, and the snow that has not melted for years reflects the crystal light. However, the zombies all over the mountain suddenly knelt down facing the east and raised their arms high to the rising sun from the top of the mountain. His pale face was expressionless, his mouth opened and closed like a white seal, making a vague grunt, and opened his hands to the sun. On the snow-capped mountains, those raised arms are standing there, shocking. Those zombies! Are those zombies worshipping the sun? The Sheng opened his mouth wide for a moment, and immediately recovered and fled panicked among those forested arms. She wants to escape, she wants to escape. If you don't take this opportunity to escape, you will definitely be eaten by those zombies. She crawled down in the knee-deep snow, not daring to look at the stiff and expressionless faces and muddy eyeballs of those dead people. The sharp eyes pierced her palms and ears. She didn't care, but rolled down with her hands and feet, passing through the kneeling zombies. However, the strange thing is that those zombies just kneel facing the top of the mountain, raising their hands to the sky, and there are vague purrings in their throats. They can no longer distinguish the muddy eyes of the pupils, looking straight up at the glare on the top of the snow-capped mountain. The sun looked like he hadn't seen the living girl who was running away in embarrassment. Maybe they have become blind after thousands of years of freezing. Suddenly, a thought came out of that Sheng's head. The Dongba girl glanced at the zombie beside her side, and involuntarily let out a sigh of relief. She stepped on a zombie's calf flat on the snow and jumped into a snow in the ditch. However, at that moment, the arms of the zombies were suddenly lowered. They stood up slowly from the snow, their behaviors stiff, and their joints creaked. Then in twos and threes, the zombies with scattered snow all over their bodies wandered around on the snow slope, bending over and pulling on the snow. Before Sheng could figure out what they were doing, he saw a zombie not far away pushing aside the snow and pulling something out of the snow. Immediately, all the zombies around it surrounded them, eagerly purring from their throats, and 7 or 8 blue and white animals stretched out coldly, howling in all directions, putting them in the mouth and chewing. When it became clear that what Swexia had dragged out was a newly dead corpse, Na Sheng hurriedly covered his own exclamation in his mouth. Seeing those zombies tearing apart the corpses and chewing the corpses with relish, she shuddered all over her body, and she felt that her stomach and intestines began to overturn violently. She couldn't help it anymore, stood up from the hidden snow ditch with her mouth covered, and rushed desperately. As she walked together, the group of zombies looking for food were shocked and turned around one after another, looking at her who was running away with grey and muddy eyes, and strode around in stride. Na Sheng staggered in the knee-deep snow, and the zombies seemed awkward, and they didn't bend their knees when they walked. However, as soon as they took a step, they were twice as big as an ordinary person. The quartet surrounded them in a hurry. She panicked, staggered, and fled on the snow peak, suddenly turned her head, and vaguely saw a young girl approaching her not far away. Her belt was still shining with a dazzling light blue light. Na Sheng couldn't help being surprised and happy, and rushed to the snow on the left with all his strength. However, he ran in a hurry, but he didn't notice that the snow covered the icy ridge, and his feet were no longer on the ground. She ran towards the living companion, stomped on the air, and fell off the steep between the two with a crash. When I woke up again, the sun had risen to the middle of the sky. As soon as Na Shengfang opened his eyes, he was stabbed and closed, feeling unspeakable soreness all over his body, as if every bone was shattered. The left hand subconsciously supported it when it landed, and it seemed that it really broke, and it was even more painful. She couldn't help groaning, tears from the pain. However, in the extreme bitter wind, tears quickly condensed into ice flowers on the cheeks, and his face was so cold that it stinged like cracks. Damn Samo! I was left alone in such a place. Damn, damn! God thundered him to death, snow mountain zombies killed him, mountain malays poisoned him. She scolded the unhuman puppet master in her heart, and exhausted all the vicious spells she knew. Swearing and cursing, he suddenly remembered the woman he saw when he fell off the cliff. Sheng's eyes lit up, and he cheered up, stood up and looked forward, trying to find the girl's trace in this deadly empty mountain. There is one more person. It's always good to be in company. However, as soon as she raised her head, she saw a short distance in front of her, a young girl who was also sitting on the snow and looked up at her. Sheng was stunned for a moment, and subconsciously moved closer. The girl was also struggling with a pained expression, and moved a little bit. Damn it! Suddenly, the Dongba girl smiled bitterly, and threw the snow she was holding at the other party. The snowball spread out on the smooth and hard glacier wall, making the girl reflected on it also full of heads. Shirayuki, actually deceived by his own illusion, once again confirmed that she must be alone on the snowy mountain to make a way out. The 17-year-old Dongba girl did not cry or scold anymore, gritted her teeth, and managed to get up from the snow. Suddenly, she discovered a strange phenomenon: those zombies did not chase. She was in a coma for more than an hour, but the zombies didn't come over. Only then did Na Sheng carefully look at the place where he fell. In fact, it is just a recessed col on the western of the snowy mountain. It is more than a foot high from the place where he just fell. A glacier hangs upside down, like a huge side mirror. Looking west, you can still see the Yunhuang continent and the White Tower. And around, no matter it was on the snow ridge just now or outside the col, there were zombies cruising in the wood expressionlessly, staring at her with grey and muddy eyes, making a gurgling sound in the throat, but did not take a step closer. She shivered with fright, and subconsciously clasped her arms tightly, a step back against the ice wall of the mountain col. Startled, she remembered that those zombies couldn't get through, but why didn't they come? Is there anything they taboo here? When the body was almost numb from the cold, fortunately, her mind was still thinking normally. Then, Na Sheng suddenly turned around and looked up at the mirror-like glacier. It was not bad. A light blue light pierced her eyes across the ice. That was the light she saw from her own shadow the moment she fell. That kind of light comes from a ring. A gem ring sealed under the Wanyan Glacier. However, it was not the shining ring that made Na Sheng exclaim, but the severed hand wearing the ring. It was a shoulder-length broken right hand, full of flesh and blood, as if it were alive. Bones of different lengths were exposed at the fracture, muscles were rolled up, and the sleeves with pale gold brocade swaths were wrapped in the hands of blood stains. There was a circle of 3-finger-wide black lasso on his wrist, which was deeply cut into the skin, and the blood had been condensed in the ice. It could be seen that this hand was torn off by the lasso and the sleeve. I just don't know why. Frozen on the top of this flying bird disaster. Na Sheng took a breath of air, and looked at the severed hand sealed inside through the ice. It should be the hand of a noble man. The clothes are luxurious, the skin is pale and clean, the fingers are slender, the knuckles are strong, and the nails are slightly purple due to congestion, but they are very carefully trimmed, and the fingers are slightly bent toward the palm to form a half-grip shape. On the ring finger of this right hand, there is a silver white ring. The bracket is a pair of open wings. In the two wings, the sapphire emits a faint light. Is it because of this ring? Is it this ring that shocked the mountain of zombies? Before he could think about it anymore, a smile of luck filled the cheeks of the Dongba girl. She folded her hands and bowed to the severed hand that was blocked by the ice. God, I finally left a way out for me. The low roar of the corpses caught the wind and snow to the ears, and the Sheng didn't hesitate, struggling to stand up. No way, I don't know who offended me, let me save my life by borrowing this ring. She couldn't use her left hand anymore. She drew out the meow knife with her right hand and plunged it into the ice wall, trying to break the ice and take the ring. When the knife plunged into the ice, she suddenly staggered. As if something moved underground, it shook the snow from the entire snow-capped mountain. Could it be that the lovebirds flew back again? Na Sheng's face changed, but he raised his head. Behind the chaotic flying snow, the sky was as blue as washing, and there were no traces of birds. She didn't notice it. The moment she looked up and looked at the sky, the ring on her broken hand suddenly glowed again, shining pryingly on her face, and then quickly dimmed. Feeling the change in the air, Na Sheng did not dare to delay. Although he thought about it in his heart, his hands were not stopping. Miao Dao chipped open the ice, and soon broke a square hole in his hand. Okay. Although he felt the snow under his feet trembling, Na Sheng let out a long sigh of relief, and reached out, trying to remove the ring. However, the ice on the front shattered, and his hands were still firmly frozen by the ice in the other 3 directions. Why is it freezing so fast? She became a little impatient. She didn't bother to continue prying away the ice cube, so she wanted to chop off the wrist of that hand with a knife. When the blade pierced the frozen wrist, the Dongba girl suddenly hesitated. Although the hand wearing the ring had no life, it still exudes indescribable pressure in the ice, noble and mysterious. There was a sudden jump in the heart of the psychic girl, and she felt some inviolable power. Damn it! It seems a bit too much to do this. Na Sheng sighed and retracted the meow knife that slashed his wrist. Is it too barbaric? It's not much better than those zombies that eat corpses. Regardless of the fact that the vibration under the snow was getting more and more severe, she carefully pried the frozen ice with a knife, striving to pry loose the ice near the broken hand without hurting the broken hand. Click! Finally prying the ice away, Na Sheng carefully took out the entire broken arm, took off the silver jewel ring on the ring finger, turned around under his eyes, and saw that there was a brand on the inside of the ring and touched the holder. The same Dao Bluing symbol. She put away the ring, put the broken limb back into the ice hole, and blocked the hole with crushed ice and snow again. I don't know why, when she was holding this broken arm, she didn't feel the slightest nausea or fear. She felt ashamed that she took the ring from her hand. No way, I don't know who offended it. This ring saves my life. Saving a life is better than building a 7th level pagoda. Poor Na Sheng is only 17 this year, and I don't want to die here. She endured the severe pain like a broken left arm, held the ring, and compared it with her finger. She found that her ring finger seemed to be thinner, so after thinking about it, she put it on her middle finger. However, just now when she moved the ring closer to her middle finger, she suddenly felt a strange force pulling her finger, unexpectedly involuntarily sending the finger into the ring. Hey, with a soft voice, the ring was firmly put on her left middle finger. It was specially made and it didn't fit so well. She turned the ring, and on the delicate silver Dao bluing bracket, the gemstone gave out a gorgeous blue ray. Ah, it looks very valuable. I don't have anything to do with me. I went down the mountain and sold it just as a toll. Hee hee. Na Sheng muttered to himself, staring at the ring, but, are you sorry for the help? Quit. Before she finished thinking about it, the tremor of the mountain suddenly became violent. The snow fell one after another, and the sky suddenly turned grey again. Well, let him go, let's go down the mountain to survive. Feeling the arrival of the snowstorm again, and hearing those zombies roaring joyfully in the snow, Sheng was terrified, and he didn't dare to stay a moment longer. Rushed out of this small col while holding the Miodeo. The snow rose more than 10 feet high, and you could only vaguely see the scenery ahead. In the shadows, a few dark shadows stiffly raised their arms in the wind and snow, and stopped in front of them. Is it a zombie? This time, don't be afraid of those things. In the flying snow, she flew out without fear, holding the Miodeo in her right hand wearing the ring, she swiped towards the zombie who was approaching. There was a scream. The knife seemed to have touched something as cold as wood, and cut it off with a squeak. However, she bumped into something hidden. When she raised her head, she saw a pair of grey and turbid eyeballs. The zombie didn't evade the hand that made her wear the ring, and seemed to wave the chopped half of the arm without any pain, and the other hand was stuck straight into her neck. What happened? What happened? They are not afraid of this ring? At the moment of lightning and flint, the panic-stricken Na Sheng suddenly noticed this. Shouting, he slashed at the zombie with a knife, and with a sneer, he also chopped off the zombie's other arm. However, the other party didn't feel the pain, and she didn't rush towards her. She wanted to avoid the stiff monster and flee. However, the flying snow covered her eyes, and she ran a few steps. I found that the shadows in front of him were fascinating, and there were many shadows slowly approaching. The mountain peaks at the foot vibrated more and more violently, and a large area of snow suddenly slipped down not far in front, creating a larger snow mist. She heard the sound of the glacier in the mountain cove starting to break and collapse, and in front of her were countless zombies shaking in the wind and snow. That's it. At that moment, only two words flashed through Na Sheng's mind. In such a trance, a zombie's hand fell on her shoulder. She screamed and struggled to free herself, but the cold and hungry she was far from strong enough, only to see a few shadows around her slowly approaching, with weird purring close to her ears. It's over. Help! Help! Samo! Samo, help! The girl finally collapsed. While struggling desperately, she shouted with all her strength, can she only call this name? No one can save her. I can only hope that the strange puppet master has not gone far at this moment, and can still hear her call for help. However, the girl's voice was covered by the howling wind and snow, and disappeared in an instant. The zombie's cold fingers pinched her shoulder blades as if they were broken, and 3 or 4 zombies appeared in the snow mist next to them. Each came over without expression, and slowly stretched out his hands, holding her hands and feet respectively. Help! Help! Life! Knowing that death was in the blink of an eye, Na Sheng tried his best to call for help, but his neck was choked out of breath. At the moment of life and death, divination and witchcraft without mathematics passed through her mind. However, she has always only preferred to calculate fate and put all her energy into predicting the future, but she has not learned much to protect herself. Whatever it is. Gods and Buddhas. Immortals and ghosts. Demons. Come and save me. Any price is available. Save me. Save me. At the moment when her limbs were torn apart by the zombie, she was swaying in the dark and terrible snow, the grey sky, and the sapphire ring with silver wings engraved on her right hand. There was a sudden flash of shining light. Any price? A voice suddenly rang from the bottom of my heart. His body was in severe pain of being torn apart, and there was a lot of fright and fear. In despair, Na Sheng couldn't care about the sound of thinking about where it came from, and shouted, anything. Anything. Save me. Save me, help. Twitter. Suddenly, there was a crisp sound of broken bones in his ears, and instantly the eyes of Na Sheng went black, thinking that his left foot was no longer on his body. However, her body suddenly lightened, and she was pulled by a strong force and flew out. He heard the chirping cracks in my ears. I saw the zombies that were surrounding her and tearing her up and flew out like wooden stakes. There were 5 or 6 green and white stiff severed hands left behind and firmly grasped everywhere on her body. She retreated quickly, hitting the ice wall hard to stop her castration. Samo? Samo? Is that you? Seeing such amazing power for an instant, Sheng blurted out the moment his body fell, damn, you are finally back. Samo. Samo. Help. However, in the snow, no shadow of Samo and the little puppet could be seen. Feeling the cracking sound of the ice wall behind him in the vibration, Na Sheng subconsciously struggled and climbed a few steps forward, trying to escape from the ice wall. Take me away. Suddenly, the voice rang from the bottom of her heart again, and she felt someone grab her shoulder suddenly. Who? Na Sheng was startled and turned back. Suddenly, she jumped up that hand. That shoulder-length broken hand broke through the ice wall at some point, stretched out and held her. Ah! The Dongba girl felt the force beyond words. Her eyes widened with shock and fear, staring at the one holding her shoulder. Lifeless severed hand, speechless. Suddenly, feeling fear subconsciously in her heart, she struggled to get out and ran wildly. She ran a few steps, her ankles suddenly tightened, and she was pulled again, and she fell face-to-face into the snow. Before she got up, she only saw that hand walking on the snowy ground, and her slender fingers tapped her cold cheeks, and Na Sheng seemed to hear a sneer from the bottom of her heart. Nala La. The vibration of the Mistog snow mountain became more and more intense, and the ice wall could no longer withstand the pressure of the snow above it. The whole piece broke from bottom to top, thousands of snow and broken ice. He drowned her head and covered his face. Where there is always nothingness. Never see where the sun is. All can't be regarded as a word have, but only nothing exists. It is invisible and innocent, odorless and shadowless. However, there are countless beings in that emptiness. Upon closer inspection, it is illusory, like the condensation of smoke and the rising of steam, all the illusory floating things are revealed. The intertwined streets and alleys, the castle walls, are all in the details, like a mirage. It's just that there is no one alive in this illusory city. In such a strange place, in all nothingness, on the pedestal carved with sapphire-covered lotus, complex spells are engraved with shrines. Inside the shrine, a lonely head suddenly opened his lips on the bowl held up by the treasure bottle, and spoke, everyone, my right hand can move. The dangerous building is 100 feet high, and the stars can be picked by hand. Don't dare to speak loudly, for fear of shocking the heavens. In the hall on the top of the White Tower, it seemed that the cold wind blowing from the snowy mountains at the far east end of the mainland could also be felt. On the stargazing platform, the atmosphere is solemn, and the cold chill has been in the hearts of everyone present. Since the last dynasty of the Kongsang people, after the fall of the Menghua dynasty, a new Kangliu Empire has been established by the foreign ice tribe. It has dominated the continent for more than 100 years, and its rule has penetrated deeply into this new land. The rule of the new nation slowly stabilized, and a new order was established. Everything went smoothly under the Iron Order. However, tonight, the elders who hold the highest authority of the Kangliu Empire, the 10 witches in the Senate, have all gathered on the stargazing platform at the highest level of the Garon White Pagoda. This is an extremely rare situation in 100 years. That's why those attendants and female officials who might not see an elder show up over the years will be shocked and inexplicably chilled. Counting it all, when the sharks rebelled and occupied Yuchen and approached the holy city of Garon 20 years ago, they never saw the 10 witches of the Senate gather like this, right? Could something important happen again this time? The 10 black-cropped elders centered on the observatory, scattered in circles, sitting there quietly. The night breeze from the high sky blew their pale beards and hair, but each elder closed his eyes quietly. The girl in plain clothes was holding a counter in her fingers, staring at Ji Hung on the star observation platform blankly. Her pale face was dignified, and the counter kept rising and falling. However, near the third watch, Sirius finally disappeared from the peeping tube. Jihan peeping tube, unexpectedly, can no longer contain its trajectory. Sirius is out of control, chaos will rise. The girl in plain clothes left the peeping tube, and announced coldly. In the 10 black robe, there was a slight vibration suddenly. The 10 elders opened their eyes at the same time, and for a long time, one of the youngest elders spoke, "My saint, where does Sirius get out of the process?" "Zheng Dong." The Suyi girl replied indifferently, with no expression on the pale Guizi's face. "Zheng Dongfeng." The young elder who asked the question pondered for a while, and looked at the end of the sky to the east, with an unpredictable expression. "Is it from the Tianq side?" "Wu Peng, what do you think?" "Hurry up and send soldiers to eliminate the disaster." A grey-haired woman next to her put down her wrist bead that had been turning in her hand and asked Sen Ran, 20 years ago, you rebelled. Raising soldiers to rebel against the party, blood-stained Jinghu, and entered the Senate at the age of 32. This time if you make a great contribution again, you will be the first seat in the Senate. Although it was talking about 20 years ago, the elder in front of him who was called Wu Peng still maintained the appearance of more than 30 years old. There was a gentle expression on Qing Jun's face, completely unlike Zhang Lixia, a famous general who has turned the tide of war. "Aunt Wu, this time is different." Still smiling, Wu Peng looked up at the night sky in the east. "I haven't even confirmed who the opponent is, how to fight. Is it possible to kill all the people who came from Tianq? Know that the border country of Zizi is the territory of Governor Gao Shunzhao, and it is not advisable to arbitrarily use troops. Those barbarians in days, what are you afraid of him?" Wu Guji laughed, said, "It is a country, Gao Shunzhao is not our appointment. In the Kangliu Empire, except for our ice clan, everything else is just humble ants. An ant bites a person, and it hurts after all." The man smiled slightly, but he always kept his words back. "Okay." The old man with white beard and hair sitting in the east made a muddy voice, coughed a few times, and said, "According to the old system, support the deepest kingdom of Zi and kill all the people from the east, Chang Gluo. Grass, against the use of swordsmen, short yarrow." The 10 black-cropped elders bowed their heads and pondered, and slowly raised their hands under the robes, each holding a piece of grass. The Kangliu Empire does not have an emperor. The countless destinies on this continent have always been determined by the yarrow in the hands of the 10 elders on the top of the White Tower. The 10 yarrows had just been gathered together, and the length had not been sorted out. Suddenly, in the temple behind the observatory, there was a deep long chant, and the door slowly opened silently from the inside to the outside. In the depths of the temple, there is a faint light. The faces of the elders suddenly became solemn, and they changed their cross-legged postures into long knees. "The wise man tells you." The unclothed girl's always indifferent expression finally changed. She knelt down on the stargazing platform, listening carefully to the deep and long chants coming from the temple, distinguishing instructions that were difficult for others to understand. Tenwu Kikai lifted his face from the black robe, all turned around, and squatted down toward the door of the temple that opened in the black hole. The wise man has an order: disasters come from the east, approaching the heavens. The heavens of the east have collapsed, and one of the 5 seals has been broken. The princes, please guard the remaining 4 seals, and immediately send troops to kill those who come from the east of the heavens. Make every effort. The saint recounted the incomprehensible dictation word by word, her voice indifferent. Follow the teachings of the wise. The 10 black robe crawled on the ground, and all replied, with a very respectful voice. The sound in the temple fell silent, and the heavy doors closed silently. Until the door of the outermost hall was closed, those who were crawling outside dared to raise their heads. The 10 elders glanced at each other silently, and suddenly an atmosphere of solemn killing filled the group of people closest to the power center of the empire. In the silence, another blast of cold wind on the snow peak blows, and those long and short arrows fly all over the sky. Was it originally meant to use swords and soldiers? He raised his eyes and scanned the yarrow in the air. There was a wry smile on his face under Wu Peng's cloak, 7 long and 3 short. I don't know who the other 2 are. Cast. The low self-talk was unfinished, and the wind rolled over, and the yarrow that determined the fate of the mainland suddenly disappeared into the night sky. It turns out that grass is grass after all, so how can it really influence the fate of the Kangliu Empire and the wild continent like the voice in the temple? 3. The hand of the devil. Na Sheng, who had just woke up, blurted out an exclamation when he looked at the 10 Futhai icicle below, and started to sit up with a tremor. However, the ice was so smooth that she lost her balance as soon as she moved her body and planted straight down from the top of the tall icicle. With a pop, she was lifted by her ankle and pulled upside down. Where is this? The Dongba girl only remembered the moment when the last monstrous snow wave drowned herself, her face pale, thinking in her heart, tightly grasping something next to her and letting her body sit on this tall icicle. Keep your balance. At her feet was a big storm passing by the unrecognizable snow-capped mountains behind, and she escaped the earth-shattering avalanche and sat steadily on the top of a 10-Futhai icicle. The height made her feel dizzy and dizzy. It's the half of Mistog Snow Mountain. Suddenly, a voice answered. Who? Shocked that the thoughts in his heart that he had never spoken were actually known, Na Sheng suddenly looked back and looked around. However, the empty snow-capped mountains were empty, and the sky was grey, and even the zombies cruising around were gone. She sat on the tall icicle and became more nervous. Who is it? Who is talking? It's me. Someone answered suddenly and patted the back of her hand as a greeting. Na Sheng lowered his head subconsciously, and saw that he was sitting on top of the icicle, holding a pale severed hand tightly. Yet, she let go of her hand like a fire, suddenly remembering everything before the avalanche. Seeing the active severed hand, her eyes showed extreme fear, and she staggered back. Be careful! The voice screamed. However, it was too late, and Na Sheng stepped away desperately, tilted his body, and immediately fell from the top of the icicle that was less than 3 feet in radius. The wind whizzed past her ears, and the moment she fell, she realized she was approaching death. The sharp icy edge on the ground pierced the face like a sharp sword, and the instinct of life made her blurt out an exclamation, "Help, life!" Smack! She suddenly felt a tightness on her ankles, and the speed of her body's falling suddenly slowed down in an instant. Then one hand stretched over, hugged her waist, and gently put her on the snow. Life and death are on the line. Na Sheng's feet finally stepped on the ground, and the hanging heart also fell to the ground. However, she lowered her head and saw the ring on her right hand and the severed hand wrapped around her waist. She exclaimed again, and jumped up like hot, jumping and screaming while breaking with force. Open the severed hand, let go! Let go! Let go of me! Let go and let go. The voice said indifferently from the bottom of my heart, and then let go of his hand, fell on the snow with his broken arm, and walked lazily to the side with his fingers as a step. After all, it was the second time to see such a weird sight. The Dongba girl finally calmed down a little bit, stepped aside and watched the severed hand moving on the snowy ground, and asked carefully, did you save me? Of course. The voice came directly into her heart, and that hand stood up on the snowy ground, lit her remotely, and changed various gestures with the voice. I saved it twice. It seems that it was still before passing the heavenly fault. I have to save you several times. But you don't have to thank me because you promised to pay the price. Na Sheng gazed at the severed hand, only to feel that the coldness in his heart was rising one after another. It was a terrible feeling. What exactly is this hand? Demon? Fairy ghost? God Buddha? It doesn't seem to be either. Suddenly she jumped up and pushed down the ring on her right hand. Give it back. Give it back to you. I won't do it. I won't do it. However, no matter how hard she tried, the silver-white ring seemed to have taken root, and it couldn't be taken off on her right middle finger. The harder she tried, the tighter she tightened. Don't waste your effort. The voice laughed when she saw her jumping so eagerly to take off the ring. If it fades, your finger will be strangled. However, a word reminded the Dongba girl, that Sheng didn't even think about it, picked up the meow knife in his left hand and slashed it down. Hey! That voice expressed surprise for the first time. Awesome! However, the knife never touched the finger, and the ring suddenly flashed a dazzling light. In the light, as if encountering a lightning strike, the knife in Sheng's hand was cut into 2 pieces and flew straight out. Her left arm had already been broken, and the force this time made it even more painful to the bone marrow. The pain made her hug her arm and bent down. The bone in your arm is broken. The broken hand nodded her left arm and said, don't use any force, you have to tie it up first. Don't come here. Seeing walking on the snowy ground to succeed, Sheng took a step back in horror. Don't come over. The hand hesitated for a while, and the voice in his heart suddenly laughed. It's sad, seeing you scared like that. Do I look so scary? I won't eat you again. Na Sheng looked at the pale and slender hand on the snow. The indescribable pressure was still used like a mountain, and he couldn't help but blurt out, it's terrible. I have never felt such terrible pressure on anything. You, whatever you are, stay away from me. It's so ruthless. How can I be your savior? The voice smiled helplessly, but the hand gave her a thumbs up. But, it's amazing you can actually feel that I am already the hidden power. Worthy of being a psychic who can wear this ring. I have waited for this opportunity for thousands of years. But, why is it such a troublesome little girl? I don't want it. I'll give it back to you. You, don't follow me. Anxious, Na Sheng shook his hand hard, trying to take off the ring. You take it back, take it back. Tisk tisk, it doesn't count to talk like this. Once this ring is put on, it won't fall off unless I want to. Seeing her angrily expression, the voice laughed sarcastically. Actually, why are you so scared? I won't hurt you, and if you don't have me, you probably won't even be able to descend the Mistog mountain, and you will become a zombie's feast. Na Sheng shuddered suddenly, and the encounter that she was almost torn apart by the zombies just now still had a great deterrent effect on her. Thinking that the zombies that have temporarily disappeared at this moment are likely to be under the snow, she suddenly dared not sit on the snow, and suddenly jumped up. Looking around the vast expanse of wildness, the fear in her heart grew stronger. You just have to take me through the heavenly fault to the kingdom of Zizi. Approximately seeing her shake, the voice in my heart continued to be tempting. Look, it's easy. I can protect you safely to the cloud and wasteland. And you just need to take me on the road. I'm not heavy, am I? Not like you, too heavy to drag and drag. You. After all, it was the girl's house, and the Sheng jumped up with anger. However, remembering that he had just been in the avalanche, it must be the other party who pulled himself out of the danger. Suddenly, there was a moment of loss in his heart, and he couldn't speak. Forget it, don't make it difficult for others. Seeing her groaning silently, that voice seemed to finally be discouraged. Without you, I will spend more time walking to Yunhuang at the most. You can stay here and feed the zombies. Before the voice fell, Na Sheng suddenly felt that the ring on her right suddenly loosened and fell into her palm. Hey! Hey! Come back! Seeing that hand suddenly walked in the opposite direction, leaving her alone in the snow, the Dongba girl felt lonely and helpless in her heart, and finally couldn't help yelling. That hand! You bring me back! However, that hand moved faster and faster, and the 5 fingers quickly moved alternately on the snow, and quickly disappeared into the icy edge. That ubiquitous and overwhelmingly weird breath finally dissipated, but Na Sheng suddenly felt another kind of murderous danger, holding his shoulders shivering in the blank snowfield. I promise you! I promise you! Fearing that this mysterious hand would drop and disappear completely like Samo, Na Sheng hurriedly put the ring on her middle finger, held it high, and shouted at Shino, Hey, look, I put it on. You, don't leave me. However, the sound dissipated in the wind, and the sound was not heard. That Sheng didn't give up, and he called out again, but there was still a whistling wind in his ears. She stood on the snow, and her sense of fear made her stand still and dare not take a step. Suddenly, wondering if it was an illusion, she felt the snow under her feet move again, as if something had broken out of ice. Yet, the dormant zombie was about to haunt again, yelling in fright, but couldn't wait for her to jump away. That pale hand had already reached out from under the snow, and instantly grabbed her foot. Ankle. She staggered and fell on the snow. Ha 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 ha. Suddenly, the voice rang again, and he smiled triumphantly. Fang Ding was shocked and looked at the hand that grabbed her. It was just a severed hand. She was taken out of the snow with a frightened leap. When she fixed her eyes, it was the terrible walking and talking monster. You! With a long sigh, she kicked off that hand, struggling to get up from the snow. Get away! Okay, I will ask the girl for your care in the future. The proudly arrogant voice finally subsided, gentle and polite. At the same time, one hand stretched out, took Na Sheng's hand, and pulled her up from the snow. Excuse me, please send me to Yunhuang and remember that you must not make any outsiders notice. Okay, okay. I said I promised you. Na Sheng replied angrily, standing up, trying to shake off the pale severed hand holding her wrist. However, before the voice fell, her impatient tone suddenly froze. When I looked up, I saw a handsome young man pulling her up on the snowy ground in front of him, with eyebrows flying into the temple, high crown and wide sleeves, gorgeous clothing, and staring eyes. The smile on the corner of his mouth has not yet subsided, and the smile looks radiant like the sun. Hey! Na Sheng was dumbfounded, looking at the man in front of him who descended from the myth. You. However, it was just a momentary loss of consciousness, and the person in front of her suddenly disappeared out of thin air. The pale hand that was still holding her was still and terrible in appearance. Condensing an illusion to show you, the voice in my heart rang and laughed. Remember my handsome appearance, you won't be scared by seeing my right hand in the future. What's your name? Na Sheng hadn't recovered from the awe-inspiring glimpse just now. Nana was speechless. Forget it, I know that you are called Na Shen, but I only ask you according to the etiquette. That hand was too lazy to wait any longer, then pulled her sleeve. It's not early, let's go down the mountain soon. It will be bad if it gets dark. Because of the guidance of that hand, the way down the mountain became surprisingly smooth and easy. Na Sheng slid down the mountain easily, stepping on the snow, while facing the hand on his shoulder with a series of questions. Are you a human? Or a on Yunhuang Zhou? You seem to be great. Why did you go to that place? Are you dead? It's weird, you can understand me, and I can understand you. Does Yunhuang say the same things as Zhongzhou? Are there gods like you on Yunhuangzhou? Oh, I forgot that Yunhuang is completely different from Zhongzhou continent. You don't have any problems with life and death, do you? Do you eat or not? I heard that you also have a country. Yet. So do you have parents and siblings too? By the way, when I think of it, you can't use common sense to measure it. Could it be said that you are in such a divided state that the gods of Yunhuang are usually like you? Are you born to be divided, only rarely? Did the limbs get together intact? By the way, it seems that you only have 2 hands and 2 feet. I thought the people on Yunhuang looked the same as those from Zhongzhou.